As I'm sure most of you know, I don't talk about my mom very often. In fact, almost never. For those who might be new to my channel, I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, and only a few years ago started to realize that the group is a damaging, destructive cult. I got disfellowship from the group when I was 18. I've been shunned by my friends and family ever since. But gradually over the years, most of my family has left the religion, except my mom. She's the last one. She hasn't really talked to me in 12 years because she thinks I'm possessed by Satan. But she texted me the other day, for the first time in a long time, and had some interesting things to say. Let's get into it. If you're interested in hearing the whole backstory, you can take a look at my older videos. I've talked about it just about every time I talk to my mom because it's such a rare occurrence. But I'll give you guys the abridged version for now. I got baptized in the religion when I was around 15. That's a binding contract as far as they're concerned. If you realize it's complete bullshit when you reach an age where you're legally allowed to sign contracts, it doesn't matter. They shun you anyways. My dad was pretty physically to us when I was a kid, but the Jehovah's Witness elders kept telling my mom to go back to him anyways. Said it was her duty as a spouse. She made a promise, for better or worse, until death do you part. So she did. She kept going back to him, despite the fact that he was a straight up monster, because the religious leaders want you to view them as a government. When Armageddon starts, they believe world governments will crumble and Jehovah's Witnesses will specifically be targeted by what authorities there are, so they intend to have the infrastructure in place to take control of a population just like a government would. So what did I do to get disfellowshipped? Must have been pretty heinous, right? I smoked a cigarette. I wasn't allowed to have friends who weren't part of the religion, so when I got to high school, all that repression started coming out. I went to some high school parties and started hanging out with worldly people. I smoked a cigarette and drank some beer, and they disfellowshipped me. Of course, the story is a lot more in-depth than that, but as I said, I'm giving you the abridged version here. So I turn 18 and I get disfellowshipped, even though I begged them not to disfellowship me, and my mom hasn't really talked to me ever since. But I got a message from her the other day. Every year or two, she messages me to see if I'll let her see my daughter. Usually I say yes, as long as the contact is strictly controlled and she isn't trying to cram cult propaganda down her throat. So my mom messages me the other day to ask about that. In the middle of the conversation about the next time she's going to see her, she says this: "I just remembered that I'm getting into a program for PTSD with the VA again." She has PTSD from my dad. We all do. Me, my brothers, my sister, and my mom. She goes to psychotherapy for it. Then she says, "Owen, I realized recently that early in my first marriage, which was still with my dad, they got married, divorced, and then remarried. I realized recently that early in my first marriage, the so horrific that it really screwed up my head. I feel like it screwed up my core being. I know what it is to be a victim of a cult-like situation. The person kind of gets in your head and reprograms what you've always known to be true. I got out of that when I came in the truth." That's what Jehovah's Witnesses call the religion, the truth. But all this was kind of coming out of nowhere. Like, why is she even talking about cults? I told her I would never bring this subject up with her. She's opening the door. Why? She goes on to say, "I got out of it when I came in the truth. I needed the Bible to teach my mind what was good and clean and right. But recently I realized that I'm still having panic attacks and freaking out in my head because the programming that got done early in the marriage is still in my head. I know what it is to be in a cult. It takes away your free will." Now that is fascinating. She seems to know a lot more about being a cult than I gave her credit for. I mean, it's one thing to have the experience of being a cult member, and an entirely different situation to understand exactly what's happened to you and how they operate. I'm guessing her therapist is working with her or something. I don't know. Anyways, I responded, "That's right, but you weren't aware of it when it was happening, right? You didn't realize you were being programmed." She says, "No, I didn't. I thought I was being a good wife, a best friend, the one he could always count on to be his number one." I said, "That's how it works. Either people are unaware of the fact that they're being programmed, or they embrace the programming because they believe it to be for their own benefit, i.e. the new personality." I chose that phrase specifically because, for one thing, that's a hallmark of a cult. That's what's actually happening. That's what makes a cult different from any other normal religious group. They're programming a new personality into you, the cult personality. I'll get into it more in a minute, but this is way beyond layman knowledge at this point. She wouldn't know this unless somebody was specifically talking to her about it, like, say, her therapist. I couldn't even believe I was reading the words I was reading. Now for the really relevant part. Jehovah's Witnesses specifically say that they're trying to reprogram a new personality into every member of the religion. They call it the new personality. I was honestly surprised they were so on the nose with it. It's straight out of the cult handbook, if such a thing existed. So she says, that's kind of the thinking I had when he was doing that, but it was evil thinking, and if I didn't obey, I got punished and rejected. It was a horrific situation. I was led to believe that my family didn't want me, and he was all I had. Obviously, she's describing a cult in eerie detail. That's exactly how cults operate. But she's just talking about her relationship with my dad right now. I responded, cults at their most basic are relationship between the member and the leadership. That's why a lot of psychology is the same. It transfers over. The goal is to form the personality into a clone. Base your moral compass on the abuser's morality rather than your own conscience. That's why it hurts to follow the rules sometimes. With one abuser and one survivor, there can be without legal action. In big groups, it's harder to hide. So big groups like cults typically use other control mechanisms like shunning critics or ex-members. They also control information. They don't want you to hear opposing opinions because that could challenge your faith in the leadership. The goal is to control behavior, thoughts, emotions, and information. If you don't tamp down on all four, then the survivor will reach out in one of those four directions to understand what's happening to them. As a side note, I want to point out my use of the word survivor instead of victim. My mom keeps using the word victim. We aren't victims. None of us are. We're survivors. We came out the other side. Some of us looked like a fucking train wreck when we came out the other side, like me, but we're here. We didn't make it through because we were strong. We're strong because we made it through. We survived. Anyways, my mom responds, my new personality today is based on Bible truth, and if it's a cult, it isn't. I'm being reprogrammed by the sovereign of the universe, the great creator, for the goodness and benefit of myself. It's just an education on how to live a good, clean life. I understand what you're saying. It's easy to see why a person could see Jehovah's organization as a cult. It's not a cult, but even if it were, I'm okay with it. I'm not going blind. I see the issue. A common response to the accusation that the group you're a part of is a cult. I'll respond to her in a minute on that point, but generally speaking, cults tend to have an ends justify the means mentality, i.e., they believe they're justified in doing anything, literally anything, if it furthers the goals of the group. Jehovah's Witnesses call the concept theocratic warfare. Scientology calls it fair gaming. Most cults have a name for the doctrine, but the bottom line is this. She seems to recognize that changing your personality is not good. She talked about how my dad did it to her when they were still married, but she's excusing it away for Jehovah's Witnesses because it's for the greater good. I responded to her, it is a cult. They control people. Now, you can say they're correct in doing it for the greater good if you want, but definitionally, that's what it is and how it operates. Then again, literally every cult in existence believes they were correct in doing it for the greater good, so. Then I posted a link to an article on the Jehovah's Witness website about the new personality, what it is, and why they feel justified in manipulating people by programming it into them. She said, I'm good. I'm happy. I hear what you're saying and I understand where you're coming from. It's okay with me if that's how you think. I have no issue with it. I just know that I'm where I want to be and I see clearly. I responded, in my opinion, the correctness of something is irrelevant. What matters is how they go about accomplishing their goals. I don't like it when people fly planes into buildings. Even if they were correct, what they're doing is evil. She says, lol, yes, I agree. Where I am is a complete 180 from where I was early in the first marriage. I'm happy where I am. And I'm happy that you're happy where you are. It's okay. You're okay. You're just on a different path, one of your own choosing, and it's okay. I'm good. At this point, I wanted to ask, who are you trying to convince, me or you? Because first of all, even through text, I could tell she's barely holding herself together. And second, that's directly against Jehovah's Witness doctrine. Holding the position is wrong, according to the religion, and she would absolutely, without a doubt, be pulled into a back room and given a stern talking to if the elders from her congregation knew she was talking to an apostate and saying that I'm just on a different path in life and that's okay. At this point, the conversation's completely mind-blowing, and I decided I'm gonna try to lightly push back. Try a little deprogramming. I said, I won't try to convince you otherwise. The goal here was to gain her trust, to make her understand that I'm okay with where she is, and I'm not going to come at her like a rabid dog, trying desperately to deconvert her. If I did try that, it would fail. That approach isn't going to work. So the next best option is to gain her trust so she'll be more willing to hear me out when I really need her to. She says, I want the new personality. I'm happy to be reprogrammed by Bible standards. It's not a bad thing for me, and I understand that it's not for everyone. This is bordering on heresy in the Jehovah's Witness religion. In her belief system, they think Armageddon will start after everybody's had a chance to hear the good news and they've rejected it. Then those people will be taken out by angels coming down from heaven. They're supposed to be pitied for being evil people. They didn't want to live up to God's standards, so God doesn't want them to be alive anymore. So I responded, I'm not saying this is the case, but hypothetically, if you found that they were incorrect about some of the Bible principles they espouse, would you change your mind about it? Honestly, it was probably poorly worded. She showed a crack in the wall by saying she recognized they were programming her, but she was okay with it because it was a reprogramming by Bible standards. My ultimate goal was to try to get her to consider the fact that she wasn't being programmed by God himself. She was being programmed by people who claimed to be God's representatives. If I could get her to see that, I thought maybe I could point out the fact that maybe they get a couple things wrong. If they get a couple things wrong, that means she isn't being programmed with Bible principles. She's being programmed by a group of dudes who believe they got it right, and they clearly did not in at least a couple of instances. She says, no, because I'm not going by what they say. I'm going by what the Bible says. I appreciate their direction and counsel, but I prove to myself by my own study and research that Jehovah wants me. This answer might be a little unorthodox from a Jehovah's Witness. They typically stand behind the governing body at all costs, but not always. It could be considered a reasonable response from a good Jehovah's Witness, but by giving that response, she's making it clear that she wants to stick primarily to the Bible rather than the 8 dudes in New York who read it for you and tell you what to believe about it. Then she says, I'm not following them. I'm hearing what they say and proving it to myself. I do have questions and I research it. I'm doing what's right for myself before Jehovah. Having this conversation, for example. Now that is a pretty big deal in my opinion. She's breaking from the governing body, even if it's for a second, even if it's barely breaking from them. She let the mask slip for a second and made it clear that she doesn't necessarily back every decision they make. Like, for example, having a conversation with an apostate. Is she saying she doesn't think there's anything wrong with talking to a disfellowship person? I said, recognizing the fact that they program in new personalities and accepting the fact that in any other situation that's a bad thing, what evidence would you need to see to convince you to leave? I.e., that they've lost Jehovah's mandate or something, that they don't have Jehovah's blessing anymore as an organization and you should go solo. She responded, lol, no, I'm not an idiot. I told you, I see clearly. If that did happen, I would go solo. But it ain't gonna happen. There's no evidence. It ain't gonna happen. I know that Jehovah knows me and works with me. I'm not worried. I'm good. Again, she sounds like she's trying to convince herself. I felt like I wasn't communicating myself clearly enough. I feel like I overplayed my hand, so I tried to clarify and make it less confrontational and more hypothetical. I said, not saying there is evidence, I was just wondering what evidence would convince you. She said, there is none, no bar. When parents raise their children, they're supposed to be programming them. When the kids grow up, they reprogram themselves to fit their own soul. This is how I've reprogrammed myself. It's not a bad thing, it's good. So just 10 minutes ago, she was telling me that she realized that programming personalities into people is the definition of a cult, and now she's justifying it to me. She can't not know what's going on here. She knows way more about cults than a layman would right off the street. She's explained the key to why all of religion isn't a cult. Behavior modification, personality replacement, clone production. I said that's an interesting point, but there's a difference between constructive influence and destructive influence. Take a look at the influence continuum. This is standard psychology. When you raise a kid, the goal is to encourage them to explore who they are, their authentic self. They want to encourage free will and critical thinking rather than dependency and obedience. She says, I appreciate that. My way of life is all on the constructive side. I agree with your statement, Owen. When you were growing up, I was still sick. I thought the way to Jehovah was forceful and by threat. It wasn't true. I did not handle any of it well because I didn't understand it. I was sick. You weren't taught well. We're all about being different or our own true selves while living a morally clean and healthy lifestyle. I responded, I got baptized. According to Jehovah's Witnesses, I was responsible for my own spiritual future. That's why they justify shunning me. Because even though I was 14, the contract I signed with the organization is binding for the rest of my life. According to the religion, it doesn't matter if I was taught well or not. I accepted the truth as my own when I was 14. Everything before that is irrelevant. I'm giving her the standard Jehovah's Witness talking points now. Any deviation from what I said is deviation from the governing body, and deeply surprising to me. Breaking from the governing body is is something you just don't do. If she was a good Jehovah's Witness, she wouldn't question their judgment. She'd go along with it. She responded, "You were supposed to have the right to say no to baptism, but you were being pushed in that direction and that was wrong. You didn't know that you really had a choice and the other choice would not have shunned you. You didn't know that. I didn't realize the situation. I believe you were 16, by the way." First of all, the other choice, not getting baptized at all, probably still would have led to shunning. It doesn't always, but most of the time. If a family is deep in it, they'll shun you, even though there isn't an official shunning policy unless the person was baptized at some point in their lives. It's a cultural thing. Somebody leaves the truth, you shun them. Simple as that. Second, I know the religion has changed a little bit since I left in 2009, but it hasn't changed much in that way. If anything, their shunning policy has gotten worse. They're more strict about isolating their members, if you can imagine that. Maybe that strictness is getting to her. Maybe her old age is. I don't know, but the fact that she seems to be outright denying what the governing body is saying here, I never thought I'd see the day. She's obviously still a cult member, but it still feels like a pretty big step. I responded, "Any destructive influence is a bad thing. I know Jehovah's Witnesses program in different morality. The reason I know that is because you battle with your own morality all the time. For example, is it wrong to talk to your kids? That's destructive influence. You can say they're justified in using destructive influence if you want, but it's definitely there one way or another." She says, "I don't think they're justified in destructive influence. I know it's not their intention. We were living in a sick world where every good thing got twisted. Jehovah knows that. It wasn't the brothers who skewed everything." I said, "I don't think they have bad intentions either, but here we are, one way or another. I don't believe Jehovah would approve of suffering no matter what the intentions are. For the record, I'm not actually sure if their intentions are bad or not. That's a subject for debate. But for the sake of argument, I agreed with her here." She said, "I agree. That's why I need to, at the least, have peace with my children. Jehovah wants me to not mourn and grieve." Again, I'm calling back to earlier in the conversation where I pointed out that every cult in existence thinks they're right and justified in using destructive influence. We can't call it out selectively. Either that kind of thing is wrong or it's not. That's the point I was trying to get across. But at this point, she seems to have completely broken from the governing body. She's even admitted that they aren't representing Jehovah correctly on some issues, and they're using destructive influence on people. Time to go in for the kill shot. This is actually a risky move, but I felt comfortable making it at this point since she'd already opened up previously in the conversation. I said, "You don't think that alone would be enough for them to lose Jehovah's blessing as an organization? In 1947, they released an awake calling shunning a pagan practice. Within a decade or two of that, they made it official policy, and by the late 80s, it was official policy to shun not just disfellowship people, but disassociated people as well. Seems like they're trying to isolate people more as time goes on, just like Dad did. Remember?" I wanted to tie it back to the previous experience she had with a cult-like mindset. This was a big risk. She went silent for a while, and then she said, "I can't get into that area of discussion because I have not researched that aspect of the subject. All I know is that I'm here right now, and I have to focus and live on this day with what I know to be true between me and Jehovah. He communicates with me through his word, and his organization does their best to help me stay focused on what's going on in this stream of time. The earth will not end. Some of us will live through the tribulation, and we don't have to worry about God's war of Armageddon. All we have to do for that is stay out of the way. I can't be worried about what happened as Jehovah's organization was growing. They've gone through a great many organizational changes and will continue to do so as we move along in this stream of time." That's when I knew I fucked up. Her barriers went up. Cults program in personalities, and they program in predefined answers to challenging questions. When you're deprogramming, the goal is to never get a pre-programmed answer, or to break them out of it if they do. If they spout off a pre-programmed answer like my mom just did, it tells me her defenses are up. She's wary, suspicious. The trust relationship in the conversation was broken, and the conversation is over. There's no hope of accomplishing anything else past this point. So I responded, "Okay, well, as long as you're happy where you are." Then I said something completely unrelated to establish a conversation outside of the religious topics, so she felt like she'd be able to talk to me, even if it wasn't about religion. Doing this in person is way more challenging. I had the benefit of being behind a text wall. I could take my time to respond if I wanted. But if I'd been in person, there are actual physical signs that you can watch for to see if their guard goes up. You can see physical changes in their facial expressions and body language when they enter cult mode. The perma-smile, the glassy eyes, the crossed arms, that kind of thing. My mom is the toughest nut to crack. I don't have any hopes or expectations that she'll ever find her way out. She's been in it for like 40 years by now, but she tentatively seemed to be willing to talk to me about mundane things. She seemed to break from the Watchtower Society on whether or not you should talk to disfellowshipped people. I don't know if I reversed all that progress with my last question or not. Probably didn't reverse all of it, but I guess time will tell whether or not she wants to have a relationship with not just me, but all of her kids. We've all left the religion by now. The sad part is, at this point, I basically have no feelings about it. I haven't had a relationship with her in like 12 years. I've moved on with my life. I don't even know who she is anymore, and she's getting up there in age. So much time lost, thanks to a cult. This shit destroys lives. If this doesn't convince you, I don't know what will. Anyways, that's all I've got for you. If you like what I do and you want to see me continue to do it, you can support me in a few ways. First, there's Patreon. That's probably the best way. But if you want to get something back for your support, you can check me out on Teespring, or you can check me out on Etsy. I have a store where I sell all kinds of interesting stuff. Mostly it's 3D printed game stands. But I also sell these 2020 dumpster fire candle holders, or just regular dumpster fire candle holders. And I sell these signs. If you want to keep Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons from knocking on your door, put these out front. Jehovah's Witnesses aren't afraid of anything, except apostates. And you don't have to be an ex-Jehovah's Witness to be an apostate. The term applies to anybody critical of the religion. So if you want to keep them away, then consider getting one of these signs. All links can be found in the description and the pinned comment. Okay, thanks for watching, guys.